Good morning and welcome back. Myself Dr. JIBRAN Ahmed presents to you Simply Pathology, and today we are back with a very important lecture. Today we are going to read about the biochemical and the molecular basis of Mendelian disorders. Okay, so how molecularly and biochemically the Mendelian disorders presents. Okay, so let us read about them. So we are going to understand that what is the basic abnormality behind all the Mendelian disorders that we had seen in the previous lecture. So what is the basic abnormality? Either there can be any enzyme defect, okay, along with the consequences, or there can be defect at the level of the receptor and the transport system. Also, there can be alteration in the structure, function, or quantity of non-enzyme proteins. And there are certain genetically determined adverse reaction to the drugs, which are also forming the biochemical and molecular basis for single gene or Mendelian disorders. Okay, so first we are going to start with the enzyme defects and their consequences. Okay, so first let us try to understand this basic flow chart. Okay, so suppose whenever there is a mutation which is involving any kind of enzyme, two things can happen. Either the enzyme activity will reduce, or there will be reduced amount of normal enzyme. So either you have a defective enzyme which is having very less amount of activity, or you have a normal enzyme but it is reduced in amount. So these are the two scenarios which can happen whenever there is mutation at the level of the enzyme. Now let us see this particular flow chart starting from the substrate. So one substrate is converting into an intermediate number 1 with the help of an enzyme, that is enzyme 1. And this particular intermediate 1 is converting into an intermediate 2 with the help of an enzyme number 2. And finally it is giving rise to a product, okay, with the help of enzyme number 3. Now normally, okay, in this particular step, okay, multiple enzymes are involved, and the end product that is formed, okay, it is inhibiting the enzyme number 1. That is, there is a feedback control. So the end product is inhibiting the enzyme number 1. So once the end product has been formed, it is going to inhibit the pathway by inhibiting the enzyme number 1. Okay, also the intermediate number 2, if it accumulates in larger amount, it can form some other substrates like M1 and M2 via the minor pathway. So what is very important over here, that whenever any kind of enzyme is deficient, for example, if enzyme number 2 is deficient, intermediate 1 is going to accumulate. If enzyme number 3 is deficient, intermediate number, the end product is going to accumulate. Okay, so if enzyme number 1 is deficient, intermediate 1 is going to accumulate. If enzyme number 2 is deficient, intermediate 2 can accumulate. And if enzyme number 3 is deficient, the products can accumulate. So what is the basic side effect? That all the accumulation, excessive accumulation of all these products, okay, can give rise to tissue injury, as well as certain intermediates can give rise to a more harmful product, like the intermediate 2 is giving rise to M1, M2. And also one important thing is that if the end product is not formed, okay, then the feedback inhibition, that is the negative inhibition to the enzyme 1, will never be received. And as a result, there will be excessive synthesis of intermediate number 1 in absence of product formation. So let us see, with this in mind, let us start the consequences. What are the consequences of an enzyme defect in the above pathways? So there are 3 important scenarios. Number 1, there can be an accumulation of the substrate. The substrate can accumulate depending on the site of block or the site of enzyme deficiency. So suppose if for example, if the enzyme number 2 is deficient, so there will be an increased concentration of intermediate number 2 that is going to go via the minor pathway and will lead to increased formation of M1 and M2. So accumulation of all the different kinds of intermediates, including those which are formed via the minor pathway, can lead to tissue injury. Okay, so just in simple, you remember, whenever there is an enzyme deficiency, the substrate is going to accumulate and can lead to tissue injury. The first example over here is galactosemia. Here there is a deficiency of the enzyme galactose 1-phosphate uridyl transferase, which is leading to the accumulation of a substrate called as galactose, and excessive accumulation of this galactose will cause tissue injury. Also similar things happen in lysosomal storage disorders, where there is a deficiency of lysosomal enzymes leading to accumulation of different intermediate products. Okay, now let us look at the second scenario. when an enzyme may lead to a block and decreased amount of end product. So as I already told you, so for example, whenever there is a block because of an enzyme, okay, it can lead to a decreased formation of an end product that is required. For example, lack of tyrosinase enzyme might lead to a decreased synthesis of melanin and can lead to a condition called as albinism. So this is one thing, that whenever an enzyme which is blocked, which is required for the formation of an end product, whenever that enzyme is affected, then first thing is that you are not getting the end product. The second thing that can happen is that if the end product is not formed, there is no feedback inhibition, and as a result there will be overproduction of intermediate number 1, which might accumulate and cause tissue injury at a very high concentration, as seen in Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. So remember, whenever an enzyme which is catalyzing the final step of the formation of the end product, so whenever that enzyme is not there, two things can happen. Number 1, there will be decreased formation of end product and there will be a disease because of that. For example, albinism, where there is a lack of tyrosinase, there is a reduced amount of melanin leading to albinism. And second thing is, whenever the end product is not there, there is no feedback inhibition of the enzyme number 1, and as a result there will be an over production of intermediate number 1, which might accumulate and cause tissue injury. The best example for this is Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. Now let us look at the third scenario, where there is a failure to inactivate a tissue damaging substrate. Okay, so there is a basic enzyme deficiency, and because of that particular enzyme deficiency there is a lot of tissue destruction. And how it is happening, let us see. So remember, in patients who are suffering from alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, normally this alpha-1 antitrypsin, the basic function of this is to inactivate the neutrophil elastase which is present in the lungs. Okay, and this neutrophil elastase, it is released in the lungs in response to any kind of pollution, smoke, or any kind of irritation. During inflammation, neutrophil elastase is released, but once the neutrophil elastase is released, it is inhibited by the enzyme alpha-1 antitrypsin. Now in individuals who are having deficiency of alpha-1 antitrypsin, these patients are unable to inactivate the neutrophil elastase present in the lungs, and in such individuals, this neutrophil elastase, it causes the destruction of the elastin protein in the walls of the lung alveoli. As a result, the lung is going to lose its elastic recoil capacity, and it is going to result in a condition called as pulmonary emphysema, where the lung is bloated up, okay, but it cannot go back to its original size because of the loss of elastic tissue. Okay, hope you understood. So these are the three important scenarios that we see with regards to enzyme deficiency. Okay, so now let us look at the different kinds of scenarios, okay, with their molecular basis. Okay, so in case of the enzyme proteins are involved, in that case, for example, there is an enzyme called as phenylalanine hydroxylase. So if there is a deficiency of this particular enzyme because of a splice site mutation, this is the molecular lesion, it might result into a disease which is called as phenylketonuria. Okay, second enzyme is hexosaminidase. So if there is a deficiency of this enzyme because of either a splice site mutation or because of a frame shift mutation, it might result in a disorder which is called as Tay-Sachs disease. Thirdly, because of an enzyme deficiency called as ADA deficiency, adenosine deaminase deficiency, because of point mutation, okay, there can be a severe combined immunodeficiency, SCID. Okay, so these are all the molecular lesions along with the deficiencies of different enzymes leading to different kinds of disease, and the protein type is an enzyme. Sometimes an enzyme inhibitor is deficient. For example, alpha-1 antitrypsin, it is an enzyme which is inhibiting neutrophil elastase. So an enzyme inhibitor is deficient. Alpha-1 antitrypsin is deficient because of missense mutation leading to emphysema in the lungs and leading to certain storage disorders in the liver. So hope this is now clear. Now we are going into the second defect. The second molecular and the biochemical defect in the Mendelian disorder is defect in the receptor and transport system. So let us see what happens. So defect in the receptor and transport system, whenever there is a defect in the receptor mediated endocytosis, okay, the best example of this is familial hypercholesterolemia, where there is a defect in the LDL receptor. This disorder is characterized by reduced synthesis or function of the LDL receptor. Normally the LDL receptor is responsible for the transport of cholesterol inside the cell. From the blood vessel, it is transporting the cholesterol to different tissues. So in case there is a defect okay, there is a reduced synthesis or there is a defect in the function of the LDL receptor, there will be a defective transport of LDL or LDL cholesterol into the cells, and as a result there will be a secondary increase of cholesterol into the blood vessels, leading to hypercholesterolemia, that is increased cholesterol levels in the blood, leading to premature atherosclerosis and myocardial infarction. So this is the first example where there is a defect in the receptor system, best exemplified by familial hypercholesterolemia. The second disorder over here is cystic fibrosis. Here the defect lies in the transport system for chloride ions because of a defective CFTR transport channel. Okay, and as a result, there is a defective transport system in the chloride channels present in the exocrine glands, sweat ducts and lungs and the pancreas, ultimately leading to destruction of these organs and glands. Now let us look at the examples over here. If you see, again the protein, the type can be either a receptor or it can be a transport protein. Okay, so first we are going to see the receptor. The first example is the LDL receptor, which we have seen. There might be a molecular lesion leading to deletion and point mutation, and as a result it will result in familial hypercholesterolemia. The second type of receptor which can be involved is the vitamin D receptor. Okay, so if there is a point mutation of this receptor, it might lead to vitamin D resistant rickets. Now let us see the defects in the transport system. So whenever, we know oxygen is one of the very important components, okay, and it is essential for survival. So whenever there is a defect in the hemoglobin, which is known for carrying oxygen, either because of deletion of certain chains of hemoglobin, okay, it might lead to a condition called as thalassemia. There are two types, alpha and beta thalassemia. Okay, alpha and beta thalassemia. And secondly, there can be certain point mutations which can lead to an abnormal structure of the hemoglobin, leading to sickle cell anemia. Okay, so there are two things, deletions leading to decreased amount of hemoglobin, that is thalassemia, alpha and beta, or there can be point mutations leading to a defective hemoglobin structure. Example is sickle cell anemia. Now the second type in the transport is defective ion channels, like the CFTR protein, defective CFTR protein because of deletion. It might occur because of certain deletion, and it leads to a condition called as cystic fibrosis. Okay, now let us do the third important alteration, that is when there is an alteration in the structure, function or quantity of non-enzyme protein. Let us look at the non-enzyme protein. Okay, so for example, hemoglobin is the non-enzyme protein. Whenever there is a altered hemoglobin structure, for example, there is a defect in the structure of the global chain. Okay, this is one example. Other example of alteration is defect in the collagen, which is a non-enzyme protein, can lead to osteogenesis imperfecta. Defect in the fibrillin protein can lead to Marfan syndrome. Defect in spectrin ankyrin can lead to hereditary spherocytosis, and so on. There are many kinds of defects, so we have to keep one thing in mind. Over here it is a non-enzyme protein. Now let us look at the example. The protein type, so these are the structural protein, these are extracellular protein. Okay, so for example, the collagen can be involved by certain deletion of point mutation in the genes encoding collagen, and that leads to a disorder called as osteogenesis imperfecta. Similarly, if there is a defect in the fibrillin gene because of missense mutation, can lead to Marfan syndrome. Now, certain structural proteins which are present in the cell membrane, like the dystrophin, if there is a deletion in the gene encoding dystrophin, can lead to Duchenne's or Becker's muscle dystrophy. Or if there is a defect in the spectrin ankyrin protein 4.1 in the cell membrane, okay, because of certain molecular lesions which are heterogeneous, can lead to a condition called as hereditary spherocytosis. Okay, now there are certain factors which are participating in hemostasis. If there is a defect of the factor number 8 because of either deletion, insertion or nonsense mutation, can lead to hemophilia A. Also, there are certain factors responsible for growth regulation, like the RB protein and the neurofibromin protein. Okay, so if there is a deletion of the RB protein, can lead to hereditary retinoblastoma, and if there is a heterogeneous mutation taking place in the neurofibromin gene, can lead to neurofibromatosis 1. So these are all the biochemical bases. Okay, we have read the first three important biochemical bases of Mendelian disorders, and then there is a last one, that is genetically determined adverse reaction to drugs. So there are certain individuals who are genetically predisposed to certain drugs. Okay, and over here basically genetically determined enzyme deficiencies are unmasked only after exposure of the affected individual takes to certain drugs. So there are certain individuals, okay, who are in general, they are little bit different than normal individuals, okay. So they are having certain enzyme deficiencies which normally does not affect their life, okay, but when they are exposed to certain drugs in certain situation, it can expose that deficiency, okay. And this is basically called as pharmacogenetics, that is called as personalized medicine. When medicine is getting personalized according to the genetic makeup of an individual, it is called as pharmacogenetics. And the best example is that of G6PD deficiency. So why it is important? See, whenever a person is suffering from malaria, okay, we first give the primary dose to the patient, okay, and after that we are giving the radical treatment to the patient, okay, for removal of the gametocytes. So we are using primaquine, okay, in the treatment of malaria. Normally patients who are not having any kind of G6PD deficiency, there is no disease or there is no problem in those individuals. But certain individuals, if they are receiving primaquine and they are suffering from G6PD deficiency, in that condition, it will result in severe hemolytic anemia. So those individuals who are having a genetic deficiency of G6PD enzyme, if they are exposed to a certain drug called as primaquine, which is used for treatment of malaria, they will suffer from severe hemolytic anemia. Okay, so these are the four important pillars, biochemical pillars and the molecular pillars of Mendelian disorders. Okay, so now we are going to read about certain important autosomal dominant disorders. Okay, so although there are many autosomal dominant disorders, we are going to discuss the three most important, okay, out of which, okay, which are constantly being asked in undergraduate, postgraduate, NEET-PG, NEET-SS and in many international examinations as well. These are Marfan syndrome, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and familial hypercholesterolemia. In this particular video, we are just going to read about Marfan syndrome, whereas the next two syndromes we are going to read in the next video. So Marfan syndrome. So basically, you all understand, and if you have seen the previous lecture, you must have seen that autosomal dominant disorders are basically affecting those kind of proteins which are structural proteins and receptor proteins. Okay, so two autosomal disorders, autosomal dominant disorders, which are affected by or in which the structural proteins are affected, they are Marfan syndrome and they are Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So we start with the Marfan syndrome. It is a disorder of the connective tissue which is manifested principally by changes in the skeleton, eyes and cardiovascular system. So around 70 to 85% of the cases, they are familial and autosomal dominant, whereas rest of the cases, they are sporadic and occurs because of new mutations. So as I already explained before in the autosomal dominant disorder discussion in the previous lecture, that yes, even in Mendelian disorder, even in certain autosomal dominant disorder, the parents might not be affected and it might be a de novo mutation. Okay, it occurs because of an inherited defect in an extracellular glycoprotein called as fibrillin 1. So it is the fibrillin 1 protein which is affected in Marfan syndrome. So just to give you a fair bit of an idea, fibrillin 1 protein, okay, so there are two types of fibrillin protein. One is fibrillin 1, another is fibrillin 2. So the fibrillin 1 is encoded by FBN1 gene, whereas the fibrillin 2 is encoded by the FBN2 gene, and this FBN1 is present in 15q21.1 and FBN2 is present in 5q23.31. So we have to understand that the Marfan syndrome is occurring because of defect in the FBN1 gene located in 15q21.1, and there is a defect of the fibrillin 1 protein, okay, which is a structural protein. Okay, so if we look at the mutations, so mutations firstly which is occurring at the FBN1 gene, they are the missense mutation and they are the ones which are responsible for Marfan syndrome. They are far more common, that is the mutations in the FBN1 gene is far more common, and abnormalities of the fibrillin 1 can lead to two things. One is it can inhibit the polymerization of the normal fibrillin fiber, that is the abnormal fibrillin 1 protein can inhibit the function of the normal fibrillin fibers, and this, as you all know, is called as the dominant negative effect. And the second thing that can happen, that there can be a marked reduction of the fibrillin content leading to weakening of the connective tissues, leading to haploinsufficiency. Okay, this is called as haploinsufficiency. Now mutations in the second gene called as the FBN2 gene, it is far less common and it results in a condition which is called as congenital contractural arachnodactyly. Okay, it is an autosomal dominant disorder which is associated with skeletal abnormalities. Okay. Let us move ahead. Now, few points regarding the fibrillin protein. It is a major component of the microfibrils found in the extracellular matrix component. It forms a scaffold for deposition of elastin fibers, and it is abundantly found in the connective tissues of the aorta, ligament, and also in the eye. In the eye, they are found in the ciliary zonules, that is providing support to the lens. Okay. Now, let us look at the basic pathogenesis. So remember, there are two important basic pathogenesis of Marfan syndrome. Most clinical features of Marfan syndrome occurs because of changes in the mechanical properties of extracellular matrix due to the abnormal fibrillin 1 protein. So the first important pathogenesis is there is a loss of the structural support because of abnormality of the fibrillin 1 protein. Other clinical features like the bone overgrowth and the myxoid changes in the mitral valves, they cannot be explained by the above mechanism, that is the abnormality of fibrillin 1 protein. So basically the other clinical features, they are explained by excessive stimulation of TGF-beta pathway. So why this excessive stimulation occurs? Loss of the microfibrils, that is this fibrillin 1 microfibril, loss of these fibrils leads to abnormal and excessive stimulation of the TGF-beta pathway. So these are the two important basic pathogenesis. Number one, abnormality of fibrillin 1 protein. Number two is excessive stimulation of TGF-beta pathway. Okay, so normally remember, the normal microfibril sequesters and stores and controls the release of TGF-beta. In Marfan syndrome, there is an increased release of TGF-beta and leading to increased signaling of the TGF-beta pathway. This leads to three important things. As you all know, that TGF-beta is an anti-inflammatory protein. So excessive amount of this signaling, okay, leads to increased amount of inflammation. It will have deleterious effects on the vascular smooth muscle development, and it is going to increase the matrix metalloprotease activity, leading to further loss of extracellular matrix protein. So gain of function mutation in the TGF-beta type 2 receptor can also lead to Marfan-like syndrome, and this is called as Marfan syndrome type 2. So Marfan syndrome type 2 is occurring because of gain of function mutation in the TGF-beta type 2 receptor. Now there are three important changes that we are going to see in the Marfan syndrome. One is the skeletal changes, one is the ocular changes, and one is the cardiovascular changes. So what are the skeletal changes that we see? So morphological, the skeletal abnormalities are the most striking feature of Marfan syndrome. The patient is usually tall with long extremities and long tapering fingers and toes. There is laxity of the joint ligaments in the hands and feet, and the thumb can be hyperextended back to the wrist. Also the head is long-headed, that is, it is dolichocephalic with bossing of the frontal eminence and prominent supraorbital ridges, and there are spinal deformities like kyphosis and scoliosis. The chest is often deformed. There is either a depressed sternum, that is called as pectus excavatum, or there is a outwardly projecting breast, that is called as a pigeon breast deformity, called as pectus carinatum. Let us look at these skeletal deformities. So as you can see, the person is of tall stature with long and tapering fingers and toes. Okay, this is the second thing. See, there is a hyperextension of one of the thumbs. Okay, there is a hyperextension of the thumb. The third thing, they are long-headed. This is dolichocephaly, long-headed child. Okay, this is dolichocephaly. And the last important thing, on the left-hand side that we see is called as pectus carinatum, outwardly projecting breast, or the pigeon breast deformity on the left side. And on the right side, you can see a depressed sternum, the pectus carinatum, okay, as the pectus excavatum. So first is the pectus carinatum, second is the pectus excavatum. Okay, now let us look at the ocular changes. As I told you, the most characteristic feature in the ocular changes is ectopia lentis. What is ectopia lentis? There is a dislocation or there is a subluxation of the lens superotemporally. It is upward and outward dislocation or subluxation of the lens. Okay, this occurs because of, this abnormality results because of weakening of the ciliary zonules, which is providing support to the lens. It is very, very rare in the normal population. So if a patient is coming with ectopia lentis, there is a very high chance that the patient is suffering from Marfan syndrome. Okay, now moving ahead, this is the ectopia lentis. You can see the lens has moved towards the upper part and outer part. So it is superotemporal dislocation of the lens. This is called as ectopia lentis, which is classically seen in Marfan syndrome. Okay, now there are certain cardiovascular changes which are also taking place in this particular syndrome. Let us see what are the cardiovascular changes. So the cardiovascular changes, they are the most life-threatening feature of this disorder. There are two important findings over here. One is the mitral valve prolapse, which is the most common valvular lesion seen in 40 to 50% of the patients, and there is a severe aortic valve incompetence leading to severe aortic regurgitation, which is the most life-threatening valvular lesion seen in Marfan syndrome. So basically, there is a dilatation of the ascending aorta because of cystic medionecrosis, because of loss of the fibrillin proteins, because of abnormal fibrillin proteins. So this leads to loss of medial support, leading to a progressive dilatation of the aortic valve ring and the root of the aorta, leading to severe aortic incompetence and severe aortic regurgitation. Now the weakening of the media might lead to an intimal tear, leading to a condition called as aortic dissection. That is going to cause a rupture of the aorta, leading to death in 30 to 45% of individuals. Okay. Now the clinically, if you see, mitral valve abnormalities are the most common. They become very floppy, leading to mitral regurgitation, and the diagnosis is made easily on echocardiography. The most common cause of death in Marfan syndrome is because of aortic dissection. Now, since clinically the patient is presenting with a variety of signs and symptoms, therefore a uniform clinical diagnosis of Marfan syndrome is based on a criteria which is called as revised Ghent criteria. Okay, here the diagnosis is based on the clinical history, the family history of the patient, the cardinal clinical signs in absence of family history, and on the basis of presence or absence of fibrillin mutation. Now the major involvement of 2 out of 4 organs, okay, that is either the skeletal, CVS, ocular, skin, and minor involvement of other organs is required for the diagnosis. Okay, so this is very important. Hope you have enjoyed this particular lecture. And one important thing I will tell you is, yes, so the rest part, that is the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and the familial hypercholesterolemia lecture, will be seen in the next part of genetics lecture. So just a humble request to all the students who are asking for the notes. So if you wish to have the notes of the same and if you want to have access to the MCQs, you can join my online pathology batch, which is being held every Saturday and Sunday. Saturday 8 PM Indian Standard Time and Sunday 9 AM Indian Standard Time, and the platform is Zoom app. Okay, and thank you everyone for the love and support that you have shown towards this channel. And if you wish to contribute, you can contribute via the PayPal link given in the description box, via the www.paypal.me/simplypathology. And thank you for watching this particular channel. If you do like this channel, do share with your friends and do share with those in need. And if you cannot understand anything, please do comment in the comment section. Thank you very much.